You can see under the tubes section, there's just a tube checkbox. And as soon as I click on the tubes checkbox, we get something very different than what we started with. So this is something that looks a little bit more like grass or sticking out of the ground. And to explain this a little bit more clearly, what we're going to do is work with just a single start tube. If I turn this to 1 and to turn my tubes per step down to 0, we'll turn our randomization down to 0, we get our single lone tube sticking out of our curve. So this could be the start of anything. It could be the start of our tree, our bush, our flower. It could be, as you start to turn up things like the width values, you can start to see that we get a little bit larger shape. That could be anything that is not twig-like or organic. But let's start back up at the top here. The tubes per step just indicate how many tubes get created down the length of our stroke. There's a randomization, or you can have them stamped evenly or grow evenly out of the length of the stroke. The length min and max is, if you set it to 1 and 1, all of the stroke tubes will be the same length. And then of course we have the width values. So we can, if we wanted to create something like a trunk, you can see that we get a wide value at the bottom and a pointy value at the top, which is a smaller value. The length bias is going to bias this more towards the length, or in this case the width, if we turn the width bias up. And then the width scale is going to give us control over the shape down the length of the tube. Now in this case, one factor or attribute comes into play in describing this width scale or this shape a little bit better, and that's the segments. So as I start to increase this, the accuracy that I get in terms of the shape that I'm trying to create will be greater the more segments that I introduce. So these work hand in hand together. Let's go ahead and turn these down just a little bit so we don't have anything too irregular. From here, we want to maybe control the direction this grows out of our stroke, and that is the tube direction. We can pass this along the normal or along the path itself, and then you have control over the elevation. In this case, we're going to be pointing this to, if we say 0, 0, we'll point this roughly down the length of the path. And of course, it's not going to curl in this case, but we also can go along the normal, and this will point directly upwards with a value of 1 and 1. So that is just kind of a look at the tube and what you would get out of this. Now, a couple of other factors or a couple of other attributes will have an impact on this. So under the mesh section, right now we're working with tube sections of 6. That's different than the tube segments down the length. This tube sections is around the circumference. So if I set this to something like 4, we wind up with essentially a box. So if we wanted to create something that was box-like in shape, that would be how we would go about doing that. And of course we can turn on end caps. If we go down and turn our width, our width value up at the top, and we change our end value a little bit, and then go back and set our end caps on, we do get an open and closed value at the top, or an open and closed box. So that's something to keep in mind because that can be very useful, especially as we start to introduce other things to our tube shape. From here, we'll talk about the growth that comes off of this tube and how we can start to create other shapes, and then we'll expand that and deconstruct a more complex brush and kind of wrap it all up so that you can create your own custom presets. So the next thing we want to do is create growth from this central tube that we've created. And just below all of the tube attributes is a section called growth. The nice thing about growth is it's, again, laid out in order. So branches, twigs, leaves, flowers, and buds have each of their independent control under branches, twigs, leaves, flowers, and buds. Very straightforward. The branches, as soon as we turn on that checkbox, that expands or allows us to control any of the different attributes associated with the branches. These are very similar in nature to the tubes, and actually what you'll find is that the branches, twigs, leaves, and flowers have very similar attributes in terms of things like the branch angle or the split angle, the branch depth. So the split max depth indicates, as you can see, how deep the branch splits, and as it gets deeper it starts branching off into more individual branches. I'm going to turn this down to a little bit smaller value because we're going to turn twigs on next. And twigs, as you can see, it's in this case a little bit long for what we're working with, but we can easily go in and change that by changing our twig length. We can change the number of twigs that go into each cluster and change things like the twist values, the different angles at which they branch away from the branches that they grow out of. And that, of course, you've got the twig length scale, which is very similar to the other graph widgets and some of the control that you have there. And then, of course, we can add leaves to all of those twigs. Now, the leaves in this case, again, are very big, so we can go in and change the value there. We can change the length and then the width. And again, these are all fairly repetitive in nature. And before you know it, we wind up with something that is maybe not the most advanced tree in the world, but you get the idea that they start to branch out from each other. So I think the next step that is useful is to break down a stroke or a custom brush that's already been created that may not look as organic or may not be